John here from Ripewave Audio with our second video with Denon's latest AV receiver, the AVR-X6800H. It sells for $3,500 and is slated to take the place of the X3700. For this video, we're going to go through the initial setup using their setup wizard, but give you some tips along the way about how to plan for this and make sure that you're putting together a speaker configuration that's going to work well with this. And then we're going to run through that whole wizard, which includes the Audyssey room calibration. We did an overview and unboxing of the X6800 last time on this channel, Ripewave Audio, but we have our companion channel, which we had another video which was trimmed down to under 10 minutes of that similar content, just the summary. And this is the way we're going to run these two channels. Is we'll do the full-length video on Ripewave Audio, and on Ripewave Express we have that condensed version that just hits the highlights. So be sure to check out both channels. When you don't have as much time, go to Ripewave Express. When you have more time, go to Ripewave Audio, and hopefully the content will meet your needs regardless of how much time you have. Now, we also did a video on the Dirac Live bass control. That's the new option for all the latest Denon and Marantz receivers. Check out that video as well. Discount, I think, is expiring in a few days here with the 30% off. So hopefully you can catch that as well if that's an important upgrade for you. With the overview, we showed how it lined up with the other Denon products. This fits below the A1H and the X8500, but is more capable of the X4800 and the 4700 that was replaced with the latest generation. Of course, this replaces the 6700 with a very similar feature set, but a couple new extras, more subwoofer counts, etc. So check out the other videos so you can see all the differences. When we look at this, before we get into the calibration, we're thinking about which speaker layouts it can handle, because as you're going through the configuration, you really should have in mind how you want to set up your system. What speakers are you going to use? What's the layout? Am I going to use the internal amplifiers of the 6800, or I'm going to use some external speakers? Now, to get the full processing capability of this, which is 17 channels, so you can do a 7.4.6 configuration or 9.4.4 configuration. Because this only has 11 internal amplifiers, you can't do the full 13+4 configuration without adding another 2 channels of external amplifiers. Of course, you can use as many external amplifier channels as you would like. So keep that in mind. And to help you with this, I went into the speaker configuration. I said, what are all the options you can do? If you have front wides turned on, if you have front wides turned off, if you have rear speakers turned on or off, what are the constraints? Now, the good news is, whether I had the rear speakers turned on or off, my options for the immersive higher height and ceiling speakers did not change. And of course, Denon gives you the option of using ceiling, wall, or height speakers that are mounted on the wall, Dolby reflective speakers that are mounted on top of your speakers and bounce off the ceiling and give the illusion of those speakers being mounted on a higher elevation. And they support all three. And I've done a color coding on here where the ceiling or top speakers are green circles, the wall or height speakers are purple squares, and the Dolby reflective speakers are represented as red triangles. And as you go into the configuration, you get to choose how many of your height or immersive speakers you want to configure: 2, 4, 5, or 6. So if you're just doing 2 immersive speakers, that's 1 row, a stereo pair that's on the height. And they give you an option of really all your choices. It can be a top front, it can be a front height, it can be a front Dolby speaker. It could be positioned, instead of being in the front of the room, in the middle of the room as a top middle pair. It could be as a Dolby surround pair mounted high up on the side walls of your room, or it could be at the back of your room as a top rear ceiling speaker. It could be as a rear height speaker, or they could be Dolby reflective speakers mounted on your rear surround speakers. If you move to 2-row configuration, you'll see that now your front speakers, you have a choice. They can either be mounted on the front of the room or in the middle of the room. So really their nomenclature of front really just means the first row. And that first row can be in the front of the room or in the middle of the room. The second row or rear is really only mounted at the rear of the room. And you have all the choices there on the types. When you get into 5-channel immersive speakers, they really intend to represent the Aural 3D layouts. So this gives you really 2 rows plus a voice of God channel or top center, depending on the nomenclature you want to use. Now, what Denon does is they label it TS for top surround. So you'll see that abbreviation in Denon. When you see that, it means top surround. But the other thing to make Aural 3D work is they have a front center speaker, which they call CH, or center height speaker. Now, what's interesting about this, you have less choices for your front speakers. They can only be front heights when you choose the 5-channel layout. It can't be a ceiling speaker. Now, if you have a ceiling top front and you configure it as a front height, does it really make that much of a difference? Maybe not. That's what we only have is ceiling speakers at this time. You won't see ceiling as a choice when you choose 5 channels. And the same for your rear. They have to be rear height speakers. The exception is the top surround speaker or voice of God speaker, and that's abbreviated as TS or top surround. When you select 6-channel or 3-row immersive speakers, you can do 2 in the front, 2 in the middle, and 2 in the rear. What's interesting about this is the middle surround can only be represented by ceiling or Dolby reflective speakers, but not surround height speakers. I don't know why they don't give you that option. Is this just a weird error? If you use surround height speakers in this configuration, will it really make a difference? Now, I also point out as we go through this configuration, whatever you set your front row to, your rear row is also going to mirror. If you select your first row as top front, then your rear row is going to be top rear. You're not going to have a choice. If you select your first row as front height, then your rear is going to be rear height. You won't be able to mix and match ceiling and rear. And again, I don't know how much of a difference this makes in the Denon calibrations and how they treat the sound, but the configuration is not letting you specify something different for your rear channels on your immersive speakers. Because I thought it was odd for a 2-row, 4-speaker immersive speaker configuration, it wasn't possible in the middle position to configure a surround height speaker, those that are mounted on the wall. You could only select the top middle position where you could use ceiling speakers. So you could use ceiling, but not height speaker. So in this case, I called Denon up to see what they had to say. And they explained to me, yes, there is a difference on whether or not you have ceiling or height. They're calculated a little differently, and you should use the one that's closest to it. In this case, he did agree that those configurations aren't allowed, but it is still possible to use the closest match. So if you're only allowing ceiling speakers for this 2-row configurations, but you have height, go ahead and configure it for ceiling and it will work. It just won't be as precise as if you would set it to heights. And the same goes for the 5-speaker configuration. This is the Aural 3D specific layout where you have 2 rows, 1 front, 1 rear, and a voice of God channel there. And they are saying that you can only use for the front and the rear speakers heights. You can't use your ceiling speakers. And again, go ahead, they said, and configure them as ceilings, and it should work, but it's more desirable to have them as height channels. So good to have that clarification. But the other thing that was going through my head was, well, they had this restriction in firmware up until March of last year, 2023, whereby if you had ceiling speakers, you couldn't use Aural 3D. So what I did was I faked out the system, and I said, well, my ceiling speakers are height speakers, and then Aural 3D would work. Well, they came out with a new firmware in March, allowing for the ceiling speakers to work with Aural 3D, and that trick wasn't necessary anymore. So I'm wondering if they're planning to do a new firmware that will also correct for this gap as well. So usually when I say these things, it's not too far afterwards we see new firmware and it addresses the issue. So let's get into the setup assistant. First thing when you do, when you power this up, one thing I wish it did is have you set up your network first and have you do a firmware update. No, it makes you go through the whole setup wizard first, and at the end of the setup wizard, it does the network configuration and then gives you an option for the upgrade. If there was significant upgrades that impacted the wizard and how this gets configured, that would be a problem because then you'd end up redoing it. What I think I'd recommend to everybody is exit the wizard, connect to the network, do your firmware upgrade first, then go back through the setup wizard. So you choose your language. I'm going to choose English. And then we just hit next to continue. It's showing you what is included in your box and what is not included in your box. And it walks you through the connection process in a very step-by-step way. I was saying to position your speakers. Now, it'll say the wizard does a very good job, particularly if you're going to wire all your speakers directly to the receiver, leverage the amplifiers where you can, and then have no more than 2 channels of external amplifiers used, then the wizard's very good. If you have more than 2 channels of external amplifiers, it doesn't talk you through that. Not to worry, it still works, and then we'll talk you through how to disconnect those internal amplifiers. So it is warning you if you have more, it asks you if you have more than 11 speakers, not counting your subwoofers. We do. We have front wides. Then it asks you, are your external amplifiers going to be used for your front speakers or for your front wide or height 3 speakers? I'm saying here I'm going to use it with my front speakers. I am definitely using the amplifiers built into this for my front wides, so I don't want to turn anything off there. If you're new to wiring up speakers, it even goes through how to put the speaker wire on the terminals. If you hit the help button, it even talks about the positive and the negative sides of the cables and how to put those on. In fact, even gets into stripping the wire, removing that 3/8 of an inch or 10 millimeters of insulation from those wires, and then twisting the wire so all the strands are bundled together, loosening the terminal, inserting the bare wire, and tightening the terminal. I don't know of any other receiver that goes through this amount of detail. If you're an enthusiast, have gone through this a lot, you don't really care. But if you're new, it certainly helps. Then it talks one by one of putting in your connections. And I already told them I'm using an external amplifier, so it's going to say, hey, take your RCA connections, put it on that front right channel and the front left channel. And then it's asking if I have a center speaker, and I do. And it's showing you now take the speaker wire and put it on the center channel. Now, I happen to have an external amplifier for my center speaker, but it's making the assumption that I'm using the internal amplifier. So I just kind of ignore that and I go ahead and just do my RCA connection. Same thing for everything else, the surround speaker, and it shows you where to put it on the speaker terminal. This may be good for some of you who are using all the amplifiers built in. Left surround. I have a back surround in my room. How many back surround speakers? I have 2. I don't know how many of you are still using a single rear surround, if you're even using rear surrounds. That was more common when rear channels first came out. But of course, some of you may still have kept that through the years. And it's showing you where to connect those again on the back. I mean, it's really nice. Takes a lot of the guesswork out. It's asking if we're using front wides. We are using front wides. Here we're actually using the amplifier. So I did wire in the height 3s for the right and left channels. And notice that it's kind of reversed. The right is on the left-hand side and the left is on the right-hand side. This is done this way because it's the way the wires come down from the room. So if you're following it around the perimeter of the room and you're meeting the receiver in the front center, then it's coming in on the same sides. So that's why they've reversed it. So pay attention to that. The left and the right are reversed as you're looking at the back of the panel. Then you're going to determine how many of the height, ceiling, or Dolby Atmos enabled speakers you have. 2 or 4 pairs of height, ceiling, or Dolby Atmos enabled speakers. It's not asking me about a third pair because I said yes to the front wides. And if you have front wides configured, you can't do a third row of heights. So I can see now the wizard won't ask me that. For the first row, they're asking about our height speakers in the front of your room. Are they height speakers? Are they front speakers? Are they middle speakers? Or are they Dolby? In my case, they're front. So they're ceiling mounted speakers. Then they're asking about the second row. Are they top rear, rear height, Dolby surround, or Dolby Atmos speakers? I like how the image follows so we know we're matching terminology to what you physically have. So I'm choosing top rear in my case. And they show you then where the speaker terminals will go for that configuration. With your immersive channels wired up, it's now asking about subwoofers. Do you have a subwoofer? Yes, I do. How many do you have? 1, 2, 3, or 4? I have 2. How are these going to be configured? Are they going to be standard with the same information going to standard with the same information going to both? We're going to make these more directional. I'm going to say directional. I got these positioned in different parts of the room. So how are they located? The default is they're both in the front of the room. And I find it interesting that in their image, they show the subwoofers mounted on the inside of the front speakers. Although most of the reports I read is it's better to mount your subwoofers on the outside of the front speakers. Weigh in if you feel differently than I do, but I definitely think it's important to have your subwoofers on the outside unless not physically able to. Of course, some of you cosmetically like mounted inside of the front speakers. So that's a good discussion for another day, but you could weigh in on this video. I'm mounted one in the front and one in the rear, and they're on opposing sides of the room, just as shown here, albeit mine are more on the side walls than on the front and rear walls. And then they're showing you where to connect these. And these are all unbalanced, single-ended RCA connections, including the subwoofers on this Denon model. Then it asks you to confirm all the settings. It's giving you a summary of everything you just selected. This looks correct to me. You do have to scroll down to see that top rear, so be sure to scroll down. Now they're going to verify that all the connections are right. This is an important step. As much as I know this system and know my wiring, occasionally I do make mistakes or I forget to put something on, like my amplifier, and I don't have anything coming out. So none of the calibration would work if we don't confirm first that all speakers are operational. So they said, make sure your subwoofer's turned in. They say set it at 30. Well, I know I can do a little more than 30 with my subs. Turn on your external power amplifiers. We did that. And then it asks you to confirm each channel. Did you hear sound coming off? And there's a little musical tone that plays. Yes, I did. Did you hear the center speaker? Yes. It's right, right wide, right surround, right back, left surround back, left surround, left front wide, right top rear, left top front, front subwoofer, and rear subwoofer. I need to label my cables better. I always swap the front and rear ones. I got to get around to putting a label on those. Now you're ready for calibration. As you may know, these Denon support Dirac Live, but that's a paid option. So for an initial setup wizard, it's defaulting everything to use its Audyssey room correction that's built in, and there's no additional charge. Use the microphone that came with it. They have this little tower device that you can mount the microphone on. I use a tripod this one with the boom microphone stand. I had somebody asking about it this week. I've had this one for quite some time. It's a quick lock boom microphone stand. They still make them today. You open up the front door of this, which exposes the microphone port. You plug the microphone into it. It's showing you it's going to take 8 microphone positions. Those are all the positions it's looking to take with this built in. There's no option for less or more positions. You set your microphone at ear height where you typically sit to listen to music or movies or play games. Make sure things are as quiet as possible. Sometimes I even turn off my boiler so I don't hear anything, pumps and all that running. Really quiet in the room while we do this. Lower that noise floor. Sometimes wait until the kids have left the house so we don't have all the noise from the floor above. So we start with the main listening position. We do the test, and it takes you through each one of these. Now, initially, it's checking for levels. It will make sure your subwoofers are at the right levels. If they're too high or too low, it's going to pause right at the beginning, and it's going to ask you to dial up or dial down the subwoofer volume. And when that turns green, looking for 80 dBs of a signal coming out of it. They're looking for similar levels from both the front and the rear, or how many you have for subwoofers. Once that is good, then it will run through a pass with all the speakers and do it for each of the 8 positions that they indicate. So follow those instructions. Then they ask you to put on the antenna. So this is the step I wish they asked to do first. Well, it's not necessary to do everything up until this point. We would get the unit updated with the latest firmware. So here's my point. This unit was just released from Denon. So my assumption is there's less of a chance of having a new firmware out when this was one of the first shipped units commercially out there. But when I ran the check for updates, there was an update. So even something this new had an update. Asking you to put the antennas on, I find I don't even need to put the antennas on with the Wi-Fi so strong in my house. But yes, we can put the antennas on to make sure. They talk about this in the very same type of details they do for speaker wiring. Put it into the screw terminal. Turn clockwise, rotate so it's in the best position. Then they talk you through connecting a home network. We can scan through available networks. We can do it with iOS devices, which I do. You can connect to a WPS router. You can do things manually if you know all your addresses, or you connect to a wired LAN. I think wired LAN is the best. I'm going to set up a more like an 8-port switch behind here so I can plug everything into a wired connection going forward. Just takes a lot out of this, but I do want to run through the paces of wireless to see how difficult it is. So it goes through and does the scan. It was able to find it using the iOS device, and I was able to hear the signal that it was playing, I think something from an internet news channel. So I was able to confirm that I got signal. We can then select a name for our device. I just ticked the top choice of the X6800 so it doesn't get confused with other receivers in our test lab here. They ask you if you want to turn on auto update. Now, I recommend this for everybody listening, but for myself, I set to no, because when you do it automatically, you don't get the indication of what features or fixes this new update has put in. And Denon doesn't always tell you on their website what the release notes are for these. So I find this is a better way for me to know what's going on with an update. So I said no. I probably recommend, unless you want to see that same information, it just always makes sure that you're up to date. I put the time zone in, the ARC. I think there's something crazy with my TV because I always have trouble setting up ARC. I kind of bypass this step. The other reason why is ARC and eARC is not my preferred way of connecting things up. I connect everything up to the receiver or processor directly and then have the receiver or processor output to the television. Why do I do this? One, right now I'm favoring audio. And 2, you lose the on-screen display if you go the ARC-EARC route. Now, you do have the web-based interfaces and mobile apps for these Denon units, so that can get you back your on-screen display. But I still like the on-screen display, so I prefer going direct to the receiver. I'd like to get your feedback on whether you use ARC or EARC. Instead, I just picked something. It wouldn't really let me pass this. I just said it was digital optical that was coming through. And it shows you how to connect the optical cable, or in the case that you're doing ARC, EARC, the HDMI. And then it walks you through input setups. I did a couple here. You can do cable, you can do media player, Blu-ray, Game 1, Game 2, auxiliary 1, 2, CD, and phono are the default choices. I'm setting, the first one is media player. That's my Apple TV. That's HDMI. I selected that. Shows you where you can plug it in. I did a test. The test did play music through. So I said, okay, go to the next thing. And it gives you a checkbox for each one that you've configured. I'm going to set up my Blu-ray player, my Sony X1100ES Blu-ray player. It's HDMI. We're using the Blu-ray cable. We did the connection test. That worked. 2 checks. Okay, we're good enough. And we're going to say done. And you can decide whether you want to send usage data to Denon for improvements. As a reviewer, I'm saying yes. I really want these companies to improve themselves. The cybersecurity side of me says no. But I'm trying to be a good partner, even though I don't have a relationship with Denon. Then it talks you through the mobile apps. They have you go through the Inhouse. They tell you to download the Inhouse app. They give you a 2D barcode. Makes it easy to find that. I downloaded it. Even if you have already downloaded these things, go back to the App Store. Make sure you have the latest version of the Inhouse app. Make sure you have the latest version of the Denon AVR remote app. Again, they give you the 2D barcode for that. And then the third app is the Audyssey Multi-EQ editor app. Do the same, download that, and then you're good. The final QR code they're giving you is a link to the owner's manual. You can do this way. This just brings up a browser. And they say, go ahead and enjoy. But I don't feel like we're done yet. I like to go in and check a few things. If we go into audio, look at Audyssey here, we can see the speaker setup that Audyssey is using. I can go in and check the speaker layouts. Here we can see what it's done. It's because I said I was using external amplifiers for the front, it's got pre-out only mode. What does pre-out only mode do? It disconnects the internal amplifiers, causing less noise, distortion, cleaner signal going out to your amplifiers. I also mentioned that don't worry if you're using external amps for everything else. It does work because the default position is pre-out as well as internal amplifier. So when they say speaker, that's saying internal amplifier and pre-out. So those are all turned on by default, but you have to pick one pair. If you're doing everything, including front wides, you have to pick one pair that's not using internal. And then in that one, that's going to be pre-out only by default on the wizard. But I can go through and change these. And we can change the amp assign from 13.1, or we can go down and manually select this, or we can change. There's a pre-out only one where it just goes through and ripples through and sets these all to pre-out only. I went and manually did these, and you can select them all to pre-out only or only the ones you care about. Be sure to scroll down all the way. We're confirming here that they didn't make any changes to the subwoofers. Those all look good the way they're set up. And the height speakers. They give you the speaker layout, and what it's done, I just picked up on this, is below the pre-outs, it's explaining if a pre-out has multiple use cases. So that height 3 front wide terminals, as it's labeled on the back, it's explaining here is this is where my front wides would go based off of my configuration. So if there's any deviation. So the height 1 says top front. The height 2 says top rear. So it's saying exactly how I configured it to make it a little easier for you. And then the subwoofer 1, that's going to be my front, and the subwoofer 2 is going to be my rear subwoofer. So that's helpful when we look at that speaker layout. I confirm the distances. What I'm looking for is anything that's wacky, that doesn't quite seem right here. Keep in mind that distances don't have to be exact, because what it's really doing is trying to time align as it goes from the speaker to where you're sitting. So these are really time delays and not distances, but it gets translated to time delays behind the scene. Levels, again, I'm looking for something that looks out of whack here. I'm going to trust at first that Audyssey did a good job. Same with crossovers. Here's what I've always seen with Denon Marantz is they want to take that front stage when they do the calibration and set them to full range speakers. That's not always advisable. You can play around setting this to lower crossovers, but the default is full range. That way we direct more information to the subwoofers. But I think in part the reason why they do this, as we'll see later on, is they let you play around with the bass management and actually do mains plus subwoofer. So you effectively get the same thing. And then the other setting here is equalizers. It can be either reference or flat. So they have their own target curve. For Audyssey, or flat would be kind of dull, in my opinion. I don't usually use dull. I don't usually set to flat. Reference is usually better. You can do a manual setup. You can go into speaker presets. They give you 2. I wish they gave you more. I wish most processors and receivers out there gave you more than just 2 or 4 speaker presets. It doesn't use a lot of memory. I don't know why they can't just give us 10 or more speaker presets. But you can select this to preset 2, and this is where I can fool around and play with something. Not disturb. I just went through a calibration and a setup. That's known good. Leave that alone. Now I can play around with this second speaker layout. Now, if you go into the advanced setting, this is what I talked about, the low frequency bass management options that they have. So if you go into low frequency effects, subwoofer output, you can choose whether it's just going to be LFE, low frequency effects, or LFE plus main for your front and center speakers and what the crossover points are going to be. You can range these anywhere from 40 Hertz to 250 Hertz. Then there's a low pass filter. So this is where the subwoofer is no longer going to get information. So this is typically set to 120 Hertz as the default here is, but it can be set as low as 80 Hertz and all the way up to 250 Hertz. Distribution. So we can determine how much of the LFE signal is going to be sent to the front speakers. So because these are set to full range, we have this control of how much of that low frequency is still going to go to the front speaker. So it's not cutting off from the subwoofer entirely necessarily. You do have this extra option, which I don't see on other brands. This ranges between -20 and 0 dB, and we can do it for the front and center speakers. You can have different settings for 2-channel playback. Default is auto, which is mimicking the other settings, or you can go to manual and set these differently for 2-channel listening, and some of you may want to do that. You can also have a tactile transducer. This gives you that rumble in your seats. You can enable that, determine the level from between -12 and 12 dBs, and what the low pass filter is going to be here. Defaults to 80, but it ranges from 40 to 250 Hertz. When you go to general settings and go to information, and you go to firmware, you see the version that you're currently running. If you then go, I don't know why they have these on 2 different things. So information tells you the firmware you have. Then you go into back to general and go to firmware, and now you can check to see if there's an update. This is where I saw that it was available, and they said that this improves overall performance and stability. If we had this set to auto, we would not see this message, and we would not know the reasons or what we are getting with the new firmware update. We just get the update. They're saying it's going to take about 9 minutes, and I found that was pretty close. I think it might have been a little less than that. When you say update now, It's going to ask you if you want to turn on auto updates. Again, I said no. And now it's giving you a warning is when we do this update, it's going to turn things off. You won't be able to listen to your music, and it will turn off your display. And you say, okay, I'll do the update. Now, briefly, it's showing you as it's downloading the files, the message on your on-screen display. But as soon as it's ready to load that into memory, that gets shut off, and you follow along what's on your front panel of your receiver. And when it's done, it says it goes back to normal operations. So that is my first overview of setting up the Denon. We're going to come back in subsequent videos. We're going to talk more about Aural 3D configurations. We're going to talk about Dirac Live and the new bass control options that you can buy. We bought the package for this, the full Dirac package, so we can do everything with it. We're going to see how much that takes us more with each option that we add in to that. So that'll be really interesting. What are your feedback? What's your thoughts on this? Did you enjoy this video? Please like and subscribe. And if you want to take your involvement to the next level, go to our Patreon, www.patreon.com/Ripewave. Of course, you can always give us a one-time donation by hitting the thanks button. And of course, it costs nothing to hit the bell notification so you are informed when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.